Hi, my name is Jerry, I'm a fantasy author, and in this short series of videos, I'll be trying to give you as much advice as I can about how to write better descriptions for your narratives. Now, there are definitely a lot of very specific bits of advice and tips and techniques that you can use that I will absolutely want to go into later. However, I do believe that developing a skill should always start with a strong foundation of clear principles. The reason for this is because while individual techniques can help you in specific situations, having a set of principles to fall back on can always help you make a decision in a scenario where you don't have an answer ready. I would argue that when it comes to descriptions, the most important basic principle is the concept of interiority. If you're writing narrative fiction today, then you are almost definitely writing in either first person or third person limited perspective. What this means is that in either of these cases, the perspective of the narration is strictly limited to that of one character at a time, called the POV or point of view character. If you have one protagonist, then this is the protagonist, whereas if you have an ensemble cast, which is to say multiple protagonists who have equal or nearly equal significance to the story, then these protagonists will take turns being the POV character chapter by chapter. And the idea of interiority is to essentially allow your reader's mind to merge with that of your POV character, to sense what they sense, to think what they think, and to feel what they feel. Now, this is a very deep and complex topic that you can have any amount of discussions about. However, in this finite time frame that I have, I'm going to be talking about 4 of the key points that I have sort of distilled from my own writing experience. And these 4 are avoiding head hopping, avoiding filtering, writing with empathy, and writing with conviction. So let's get the first 2 out of the way because these are the most straightforward, and if you've been reading or watching writing advice for any amount of time, then there's a pretty good chance you've already heard about them. So what is head hopping and why should you avoid it? Simply put, head hopping is the act of switching point of view in the middle of a scene. This is much more common in third-person limited perspective than in first-person, because in first-person it is much easier to intuitively understand as a writer that you can only describe things that the point of view character thinks and feels. Whereas if you're writing in third-person, it can be tempting to kind of slip from one character into the other. For example, let's say that Alice is your POV character and she is having a heated conversation with the character Bob. Now, in this conversation, besides, of course, writing the dialogue and what they do, you can and absolutely should also describe how Alice is feeling and what she's thinking in this situation. What you cannot describe is what Bob is feeling and thinking. You can describe Alice's reactions to him. You can describe what she thinks he feels or what she thinks he's thinking, but that's only ever her impression of it. Even if your novel has an ensemble cast and Bob is one of your POV characters, switching to his point of view should happen in a different chapter, or if you don't use chapters, then after a very clear and obvious scene break. If you need to describe both sides of an argument, then what you need to do is describe it happening in real time from one character's point of view, and then later reflect on it from the other character's point of view. You can't just go back and forth, at least not if you're writing from third-person limited perspective. You can, if you want, write from third-person omniscient, but then you have to write the entire book from that perspective because your reader needs consistency. They need to know whose head they're inside, or if they indeed are inside any of the characters' heads. The second key piece of advice is to avoid filtering. Now, like I said, this is very widely discussed and you might have already heard about it, but let's just go over it just in case. And for this one, I'm actually going to start with an example. Listen to these 2 descriptions and then decide for yourself which one feels more impactful. She saw the walls dripping with blood. Her nose twisted up as she smelled the rancid stench of rotten flesh. She heard a gun click behind her. She felt a chill go down her spine. She realized she had walked right into his trap. The walls dripped with blood. The rancid stench of rotten flesh twisted up her nose. A chill ran down her spine as a gun clicked behind her. She had walked right into his trap. So what is filtering? As I said, the purpose of interiority is to take the reader inside the character's head. See what they see, think what they think, feel what they feel. When you're filtering, instead of describing a situation as perceived by the character, you describe the character in the act of perceiving the situation. When people perceive something, they don't pay attention to themselves perceiving it. When you see blood on the walls, you don't think, oh my God, I'm seeing blood on the walls. No, you just think, oh my God, there's blood on the walls. And that is what the narrative should convey, the world as perceived by the character. Now, besides these lofty ideals, there are other much more practical problems with filtering. For one, it creates a lot of repetition. She saw, she heard, she felt, she realized. Pronoun, verb, pronoun, verb, pronoun, verb, pronoun, verb. And also, besides that, it is just kind of redundant. If you feel the need to say that she saw the walls dripping with blood, well then why don't you say that every time you describe something? So the principle that this can all be crystallized into is that what you describe is what your character perceives. Your reader will implicitly understand this, and there is no need to state that your character is seeing, hearing, feeling, or realizing something. The third key point of interiority is to write with empathy. This one is basically a continuation of the previous principle. As I said, the things you describe are the things your character perceives, and the way you describe them is the way the character perceives them. What this means is that your character's relationship with what they're perceiving, or just their general emotional state, should always color your descriptions. For example, if your POV character is Alice and she has an intense dislike for Bob, then that dislike should be present in most, perhaps not all, but most descriptions of him. If she doesn't think Bob is attractive, well then Bob is the ugliest or just the most unremarkable mofo in the world. If she does think Bob is attractive, then she probably also thinks that he's vain or conceited or smug. In one of the opening chapters of my first book, the POV character Corliss is making a business deal with someone named Rasser that he is not fond of. Often when Rasser speaks, the dialogue text says he barked or growled or grunted like an animal because that's how Corliss looks at him. Another facet of imbuing your descriptions with your character's emotional state is an approach that I call the empathetic environment. Now, this does not mean that it should rain every time the character is sad. Rather, it means that when you set the scene, keep in mind that the things you describe are the things your character is paying attention to. For example, let's say it's a beautiful day outside and your character is in a bad mood for unrelated reasons. So how does that shape their perception? Well, maybe they get hung up on all the negative things. It's too bright, it's too warm, it's too loud and crowded, everyone's out on the street. Maybe they're actively looking for comfort, like, yeah, I'm having problems, but the world hasn't come to a stop, so maybe there's hope for me as well. Or maybe they look out at the world and it just makes them feel insignificant. I'm over here crumbling under the pressure of my problems, and meanwhile, the world is just having a nice day without any reason to care. So when you're setting the scene, take the time to understand your character's emotional state, empathize with them, and let that weave into your description. Lastly, the fourth key point of interiority is writing with conviction. As we said, the things you describe are the things the character perceives, and the way you describe them is the way the character perceives them, even if the character is or might be wrong. For example, in the opening chapter of my first book, Tessa is riding through the forest on horseback at night when she's surrounded by wolves. In that passage, there's a line which in my original draft went, "She looked frantically for an escape route but couldn't find one." In my revision pass, I changed that to, "She looked frantically for an escape route, there was none." If you imagine yourself being surrounded by wolves and being unable to find a way out, you don't think to yourself, "Oh my God, I can't find a way out." You think to yourself, "Oh my God, there is no way out." Now, you may be wrong, Tessa might have been wrong, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that she is certain that she's trapped and that's what informs her following actions. This is what I mean by writing with conviction, and it's especially important in situations where you as the author know for a fact that the character is mistaken. Imagine you're writing a scene where your POV character sees someone stepping out of a car and he is fully convinced that this person is his father. Only when he gets closer and the person turns around does he realize that it's actually someone else. Now, in a situation like this, because you as the author know what's about to happen, you might be very tempted to say something like, someone who looked exactly like his father stepped out of the car, or that someone he thought was his father stepped out of his car, or that his father seemed to step out of the car. But again, this is filtering. You are describing your character in the act of perceiving, instead of describing what they are perceiving. See, the whole thing about being mistaken is that you don't know you're mistaken. It doesn't occur to you that you might be mistaken. You think something that is not correct. So in this case, you should absolutely commit and say, his father stepped out of the car, and then describe the character realizing his mistake. Again, your reader will understand. And lastly, I should also emphasize that writing with conviction also applies to situations where your character might not be factually mistaken, but rather you just don't agree with them. Going back to the idea of the empathetic environment, let's say that it's a beautiful day outside and your character is in a bad mood, so they just start nitpicking at everything. Now, if you're the kind of person, like me, who finds it pretty much impossible to be unhappy on a beautiful day, you might be tempted to write things like, he didn't like how warm it was, or he felt uncomfortable in the light, because you don't necessarily agree with how he's feeling. But in that moment, you have to identify with those feelings, because ultimately this is what interiority boils down to. You cannot expect your reader to fully immerse themselves into your character if you refuse to. In another example, people in writing groups said that you should absolutely never describe a character as ugly or fat because that's body shaming. The truth of human nature is that when your character intensely dislikes another person, they will look for any reason to dislike them, and that will include body shaming. You personally might not agree with this, but the thing about being a writer is that you have to be able to write about people who are not like you. So those are my 4 main points about achieving interiority in your descriptions. Do you agree with them? Do you think they're useful? Do you think there's something I left out? Please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your opinions. And until next time, stay tuned.